Hey, you probably heard a lot about AI readiness, but you know what that really means? I've got an expert who's back on the show here at CISO Tradecraft to tell you, stick around, you're going to enjoy this one. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. I'm your host, G. Mark Hardy, and today I have with me JP Bourget, who was last with us on the show back in January of 2024. So, JP, welcome back to CISO Tradecraft.
How's it going, G. Mark? Nice to see you.
Not bad. So, yeah, for anybody who's interested, it was episode 165, Modernizing Our SOC Ingest. And, JP, we've known each other for a while. In fact, full disclosure here, I think you went to school with my sister. So we definitely trace back. You've got your Sabres hat on. I got my Go Bills thing in the background. So, yeah, we're inveterate Bills or Buffalo fans. Although this year it looks like Sabres have got a chance.
Yeah, they're going to make they've secured a playoff spot. And we beat Tampa Bay last night, which is a good thing. And, go Sabres. I'm excited.
Yeah, seeing as I live here in Tampa Bay, I had to kind of split alliances here. But anyway,
right.
Welcome back. And what have you been up to? What have you been doing for the last year and a half or so? 2 years now.
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of years. We still do a lot of security data pipeline stuff like we talked about in the last episode. I would say that the need for that type of thinking, especially with AI, is more urgent than ever, as you can't put like LLMs work way better with structured data than with crappy data, although they do a great job at figuring out your crappy data, but with some hallucinations. We've gotten into doing a lot of Copilot readiness, or I have. I've also been doing a lot of work around what else? SIM migrations, kind of a lot of stuff we're doing, but now with this whole AI split to it. And what I'll say is that I've always been fascinated by the potential of AI, and it was when Opus 4.5 and 4.6 came out that it became obviously clear to me. Okay, it's here now, and yeah, so now I'm starting to help CISOs and organizations navigate that with different approaches to AI readiness, and I'm also doing a lot of work around just figuring out how to build agentic systems, in my personal life and in my professional life.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit. You had mentioned something about Copilot and readiness and things. Well, let's go ahead and back up one, because most of us are kind of looking at AI. We understand, are you ready for AI? But what is your definition of the concept of AI readiness?
So I'm going to split it into two pieces. So first, I really think AI readiness is it's really a data governance challenge. And if I think of from a CISO seat, AI readiness is threat protection, data security, and device management done well. And I think that a lot of organizations have been doing, with EDR, with like things like CrowdStrike and Defender, they've been doing threat protection pretty well. I think that the market around MDM is all over the place, and it's very different than it was 10 years ago. But then where I think there's the biggest gap is around data security and data governance. And if I look at like Microsoft's been trying to sell Purview for 10 years, like the different components there, but all of a sudden they have a brilliant sourcing function, because you really need to do the things like data sensitivity labeling and DLP and DSPM in order to have visibility, as well as the governance to enable Copilot safely, or any AI like Claude in your environment safely. And so the time's here, and I really think that when people are thinking about AI readiness, it's a technical problem with what I just said, and then it's B, it's a adoption change management problem. I can get into that in a second.
Yeah, we will. I'm kind of taking notes here as we go along. So we talk about data security, and data loss prevention, or DLP, is something that we've known about for a long time. Basically keeping the good stuff in and keep it from leaking out. Pretty straightforward. And as a result, we've had tools to do this with moderate success, and the DSPM, data security posture management. But it all does kind of rely on one thing, which has been, for me, the long pole in the tent and trying to enforce all that is the labeling. Is trying to, go back through when you say, I've got tons of information that never really got data labeling put on it correctly. And then the second one is almost changing the organizational culture to get everything labeled, unless there is a way for AI to do that, at which point we call success and say, wow, I don't have to go ahead and have training classes for everybody. Now, culturally, as a military professional, we labeled everything all the way down to the paragraph. Every single message that we put out that had any classification would have a classification marking on every paragraph. And you just got used to that, the parenthesis or whatever it happens to be. But that's not typically the way that business world works. So what are your thoughts in terms of that? Is this a cultural change, or can we turn to AI and say, hey, figure this stuff out, take a look at the content, and go ahead and classify it for me?
Yeah, wow. That's a great context. So I think that so when we're going in and doing readiness assessments and remediation around our findings, the biggest thing we're finding, aside from configuration, is very poorly like poor information architecture. So if I think of what's going on in an organization, let's say I have SharePoint and there is 20, let's say a lot of times we'll see, let's say 100 or a 500 user organization, 5 or 6 SharePoint sites, but it turns out that all the data is commingled inside those sites. That's like the absolute nightmare scenario, because if I think about how SharePoint works, and Google Drive kind of works the same way, where I can have a shared folder or a SharePoint site and it has its default sensitivity label. Where we can make things very easy for everybody is if these file repositories are organized by a role or function, and they automatically get classified as we do work in them. And then the only thing that has to change is if there's a file that has a different sensitivity than everything else in there. And so a lot of times we're having to go in and actually do work to help them rethink their actual data architecture, so that we can then put the appropriate tools in place the right way to make things a lot easier for the end users.
That's interesting. You mentioned data architecture. Now, to a certain extent, you have both the coarse and the fine-grained. You're saying at the coarse level, everything that goes into this file structure is going to be at the same level of categorization, almost like what we used to call system high. Okay, if you're up on the secret network, everything's secret, so to speak. Even if it's the Christmas party invitation, it still travels up there at the secret level. And the fine-grained element would be a matter of getting down, as I had said, even up down to the paragraph level, which, of course, is probably excessive for your average implementation. But when you talk about data architecture, there's two elements that you have. There's the going forward and the looking back. How do I go ahead and take care of my historical repository and get it categorized effectively? Or how do I go ahead and make things going forward correct? Which is more important and why?
Well, I think they're equally important, because if I don't fix, so in order for us to leverage our existing data well in this new AI world, I need to address the data from the past. In order to not keep repeating the mistakes of the past, I need to prepare for the future. So I would say they're equally important, but I would say that before we can fix the future, we need to re-architect the past into what we want the present and the future to look like. I'll give you an example. So let's say we have a folder share that is, company A internal. And inside there's HR, there's payroll, there's intellectual property, there's secret squirrel projects we're working on. That's very common. It's way more common than you think. And so what we would recommend is that you start to carve roles out of there. So we might have an HR folder that maybe it's HR ops, and that's all the actual HR people doing payroll, doing hiring, PIIs in there. And then we might have an HR comms, and that's more of like an internally public folder. Each one has the appropriate sensitivity label. And then we move the data into there, and then we start to operate in that fashion. So that would be an example, and then we would pull the other things out into their own roles, and we essentially define a role based, basically an RBAC infrastructure that supports all that. And so now that we have that, what's really interesting about like M365 Copilot, for example, honors permissions and sensitivity labeling. So if I'm a user and I say, hey, how much does everybody make in the org? The old way, we might have been able to discover all that if permissions weren't correct. With the new way, if they never had access to that site to begin with, as well as if they can't access, let's say, high sensitivity data, for example, or confidential data, it's never going to show up in Copilot for that in that user's view.
And that's what our experience as well is we've rolled out Copilot in organizations and looking at it as a CISO saying, how do we go ahead and protect that? It often comes down to, as you had said, will Bobby the intern be able to go ahead and pull the unreleased quarterly financials so he could go ahead and do some stock trading? And the answer is no, because Bobby the intern was never tapped into those databases. But the chief financial officer who has an appropriate access for that will see it, as well as the CEO, and they can go ahead and make the business decisions with respect to that. So to a certain extent, I think Copilot going forward is going to be effective in terms of controlling access, if you will, making sure that our DLP portion of it is the data security is enforced through access rights. Now, as we had set up things such as OneDrive, then we understand that OneDrive is sort of your personal backup in the cloud in case you get malware or somebody pours their coffee down to on your hard drive and it shorts out. Mm-hmm. And so you get your own OneDrive. Because I've had people confused, users, like, what's the difference between OneDrive and SharePoint? I said, well, OneDrive is a backup of your hard drive, and SharePoint is a company working area where you go ahead and you basically have projects that you do. But once you get up to SharePoint, if you're organized well, and if you set it up well, and we did a conversion to SharePoint a few years back when we came over from Dropbox over to SharePoint, and we had to reproduce, and it gave us a chance to look at all the accesses and say, did we get this right? Did we make somebody a temporary access to a project? We forgot to take them out. It was a pain. It took a few months to effectively do this, but essentially we had a zero-based review of all of the access, at which point going forward, as long as we maintained that discipline, when Copilot rolled around last year and we started to make it available, we felt pretty confident that we're going to do things right. So if you've been on that path as a CISO, well done, and means that you've gone ahead and done a lot of the heavy lifting. If it's still in your future, if you're still a little bit worried about Copilot, no, by the way, make sure you're using the paid-for version, because that then has certain protections that you have in terms of what Microsoft's going to train on, and you can answer that better than I. But the other thought is that even if you're using the paid version and, we're not going to train on you, what I have found is that if it gives you an answer, says, do you like this or do you not like this? If you answer that question, you are submitting that entire chain of reasoning up to their analysis for future evaluation. So we tell people, don't say yes or don't say no. Just don't respond to that. So are we keeping the division correct in terms of corporate versus personal? Within corporate, things you can and cannot do. And then finally, if we're relying upon the access rights that we put into things like SharePoint, I think we've got a pretty good confidence going forward. Did I capture all that?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there. So I'm going to try to go back to the beginning. So as far as, reorganizing your SharePoint or your Google Drive so that there's a method to the madness and there's an appropriate permission and sensitivity hierarchy, I think you're correct. But the other important part there is that as you deploy these tools, you also start to get auditability and visibility and alerting, like, hey, this person, like Insider Risk can say, hey, this person's never been here before, and he's accessed 15 files in this spot that, he had permissions, but all of a sudden he's accessing 15 files there. That might be an informational alert, but nevertheless, it's an alert. We also with DSPM, we're able to audit prompts, not just from Copilot, but from Gemini, from Claude, from GPT, inside the environment, and also identify if sensitivity labeling set up appropriately, what percentage of prompts have shared sensitive information with LLMs. So I think that it's as much about not surfacing things to the wrong people internally, but it's also about controlling what is sent out externally, whether that's through email or LLM or whatever, and not just preventing it, but like sometimes let's say you have a contract with Anthropic that we're not going to train your data, it might not be the end of the world that something was shared, because it actually does go into the ether afterwards, but at least you want to know that it happened. And so I think that capability becomes very important. And so what was the last point you wrapped up on a minute ago?
Well, I was talking about whether you're providing feedback, yes or no. Does that go ahead and disclose your information otherwise?
So my general rule of thumb, and I'm not a lawyer, and I haven't done deep research in this, but anybody in the business world who's going to put like the company data into an LLM, my general recommendation is do not do it in a free plan. Do it with a paid plan, because the entire, just like I give like my chiropractor a hard time because she uses Gmail for her email address, but she has none of the protections that if she would just to pay $12 a month with the Google Workspace, right, that she gets by just having the paid plan. Like, when you have free Gmail, you're basically, you're the product, right? When you have paid Gmail, even though you see I don't see ads in my free Gmail. So like, or in my Google Workspace. So yeah, like, it's the same thing for these models. Like, you need to use the paid version, not the free version. There's very few exceptions. So I'm not even going to bother going there. But that's really my general stance. I'd have to research that point about like, if you give them feedback that the whole thing goes up. My guess is that it might fully go up there, but I'm not sure if they would use it to then train world models.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the concerns that I've had from clients who say, "Oh my goodness, if I go ahead and release it, it's going to be on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow." It's like, no, it's not. It's going to be a needle in a gigantic digital haystack. And now there are potentials that somebody might really know what they're doing and try to go ahead and extract that. But in general, I think what we're finding is the AI usage is going to be such that, as you had said, use a paid plan, and make sure your users understand not to be uploading huge amounts of client-sensitive data or internal data up to it, or if you had said, filter that, which brings up to the question about Purview, which is Microsoft's security tool. And I've struggled out a little bit trying to use the tool, and I find it's a little bit opaque. And maybe it's just me, and I have to watch a few more YouTube videos. But is Purview the effective tool for controlling AI security today if we're using Copilot?
So let's split that into two pieces, because there's identity and there's your data. So I believe that Purview is the tool to label and govern your data. It is not the tool it can alert on the fact that people have access data, but it's not the tool that is managing your identity plane. So if you look at, so I believe with AI, the identity, like right now, AI is operating on on identity planes, or IC identity control planes, designed for humans, but the speed of agents. And so Microsoft just released this new license called an E7, which includes a product called Agent 365, which is a step in the right direction. I think we're going to, I really think identity is the gateway to access to all this data. And so I think that what they're doing with Agent 365 is super interesting. You can start to have service accounts for agents. But we could have a whole podcast on this topic, so I don't want to get too crazy into it.
Right.
But I think agentic identity management is going to be a huge trend over the next year, and a huge topic. And we need to start thinking, how are we going to manage these agent identities? Because if I'm actually running a true agentic system that's able to, the agents can spawn sub agents, that can spawn their own sub agents, and do all this very interesting things. How do I actually govern that identity, or how do I manage that identity at scale? And in a lot of cases, these agents only need an identity for like a minute, or 45 seconds. And so, like, it's in some ways, it's very, it's similar to like, scaling the crap out of Kubernetes, where, you'd have like use HashiCorp Vault and like get a certificate for 30 seconds. Right. But in other ways, it's a whole different problem set. One of the like thought frameworks that I've been thinking a little bit about is if anybody here is familiar with the concept of platform engineering. So I look at in some ways at Copilot Readiness or AI Readiness as very similar to like the platform engineering challenge. So why did platform engineering become a thing? Because companies were trying to build so much code so fast to build applications that they realized it was better for them to build a platform for all their product teams to build on top of. So we build one app, we build one authentication stack, we build one database viewer, we build one report engine, we build one, all our graphics are the same, right? All our buttons are the same across the entire set of products, right? And so you've essentially shipped these Legos to engineers in order to build the business value and deliver to customers. I think that in a lot of ways, there's a lot of analogies to AI readiness. And it all comes down to use cases. So put a pin in use cases for 1 second, because the absence of use cases is why we're seeing AI deployments fail. So what I believe is very, like, just to keep this analogy going, I think that the AI that you might be deploying is just another platform, or it's a set of platforms. And so you have to look at what your identity platform is. A lot of folks use Entra, or they might have Okta or Google, and it all starts there. And then it comes down to what are the resources we're providing access to, like how do we provide access to, how do we provide access to Copilot and train people so that they actually understand, hey, these are the guardrails these are the permissions and guardrails and agents you can use in your Copilot. This is what you can do in Anthropic. This is what you can do with Gemini or GPT. And then start to make those you almost have a store that everyone can go to. And hey, you can do these things in your environment, for example. I'm not sure the technology's 100% there to like actually deliver it that way, but I like going through that thought concept or that thought exercise because it starts to break it away from, hey, we're just like throwing all this random stuff at all these random people. We're actually, hey, we have an Outlook email summary agent. Do we want to make that available in our organization? Do we want to build our own? How are we going to socialize that to the business? Do we want to allow that? And so the other comment I'll make is that we're seeing a lot of folks. What I like about Microsoft Copilot is it grounds on your tenant organization in a secured way, and nothing else can do that right now. Although what's happening with Copilot is, ever since Microsoft partnered with Anthropic, more and more of Claude is available inside Copilot. And I think this is great for the non-developer day-to-day business person. So, I'm a developer, I'm doing, advanced stuff with AI. But I think if you have an office worker or an accountant or an analyst, we're getting to the point where, I can do Sonnet, or I can do Opus deep thinking or deep learning, deep thinking with Claude inside Copilot. And so the economical cases there, as well as the simplicity and the user cases, it's there right now. Now, where this all falls apart, I think I said earlier in the podcast that this is an adoption and change management problem, way more than it's a technical problem. Mm-hmm. And so you can't just say, hey, everyone, here's 50 Copilot seats. Everyone go try it out and tell us what you think. That's not going to work. Has that ever worked in tech? Right?
You get half a dozen people who will master it, and everybody else will puddle around with it and make mistakes, and then
exactly, yeah. And so we found two things to be very effective. One is we need to have lunch and learns. We need to show the art of possible, because the average user is not just going to stumble upon the art of possible. They're not going to be searching the internet or asking Claude, hey, what's some cool things I can do with what's going on in my environment, which would actually do a pretty good job of telling you. But so the idea of showing not only your champions, but your average users who are actually trying this out, showing them the art of possible is very important. And then the second thing is starting to keep a log of potential use cases that not are just interesting, but that would actually give real business value back to the business. And so focusing on that when you're doing, let's say, maybe your POV or maybe your first, set of early adopters, in order to get the traction you need to actually do this successfully in an organization and not have everyone, like from an end user perspective, tracking and implementing those use cases that have the ROI is very important. And we're not, I don't think we're seeing enough people do that. A lot of people, like, I hear every day, like, hey, we bought, 50 Gemini licenses or 50 Copilot licenses, and, nobody seems to like it. I'm like, okay, well, do they even know where to start? And it happens quite a bit. So I guess I'll wrap with that for that topic.
Okay, so you'd mentioned a couple things in passing I want to come back to. One was we're talking about sort of agentic AI. And if we look at, for example, OpenClaw is being probably one of the better known tool sets where you can go ahead, plug it in, turn on, let it get going. And then, of course, if we're going to have something that's agentic in our enterprise, managing certificates, managing access, managing things such as that, what's happening? What did we just see with Claude with regard to OpenClaw in the last few days?
I don't think it's as big a deal as it sounds. It's an economic big deal, but it's not like they didn't break anything. They basically just said that, hey, you need to start using the API, which is metered, instead of calling it OpenClaw from Claude.
So they're basically going to go ahead and say there's an API and you should use it, and we can keep track of it. And depending on how many tokens you're using, you might go ahead and get a bill. Or, sorry, come back tomorrow when you've got more tokens.
Well, yeah, actually in Claude, you have to pay ahead for tokens.
Yeah.
So unless you're on an enterprise account, even if you're on a business teams account, which is what we use, you have to essentially buy credits ahead of time.
Yeah. And so make sure that if you're going to be using things like that, and that's one of the things that I've learned is sort of a warning to people, is that if you're going to set up tools like that, set some throttles or some limits. We hear some horror stories about people who come back and they realize that they've run up hundreds of dollars worth of bills by having an open card.
Quickly. So we just got a $200 Claude credit because Claude was really slow last week. I think everyone got one. And so we turned on, with that credit, we turned on pull request reviews in GitHub. And each PR is about $6, which that's pretty expensive to me.
And I think we've also been seeing an awful lot of subsidizing of our AI up till now. For $20 or $200 a month, you can get a whole lot more than that value. And at some point in time, it's almost like a drug dealer who's going to say, hey, kid, try this. You'll love it. And after a while, well, guess what? The price has gone up because you're now hooked on it. Are we moving in that direction? Are we going to start to see some significant price increases when all of a sudden people realize that you can't run a business forever that loses billions of dollars every month?
Yeah. Look, I compare it to it's not directly the same, but it's kind of like Uber and Lyft, where, remember, Uber and Lyft rides were really cheap when all the VC money was pumping in, and then eventually they had to become profitable. But this is a whole different scale, right? And I think that I read a blog post maybe 6 months ago that we're coming to the end of the age of just about free or very cheap application building with AI. So so for those of us who are developers and have been on this train for 18 months or 2 years, we've had very affordable tooling to go do some pretty crazy stuff. As I do think you're right that it's going to become more expensive. I think I think Moore's law is probably still kind of there. Maybe it's going to start applying to GPUs. But there's a couple interesting things. So we have a war going on, which is affecting energy prices, which is slowing down the builds of data centers.
As well as access to maybe some of even raw materials that are going to be required to build these things out.
That's my next point, is that we have raw materials, and you know what AI's its biggest needed resource is memory. And if you look at there's a huge shortage of memory for personal computing right now. So if you're a gamer and you need new RAM for your computer, it's almost impossible to get. I don't even know why I know that. But I think it'll be interesting over the next few years. I think that there's also a lot of local pushback against another 10 data centers in our county.
We've seen Maine passing legislation coming out that's basically going to restrict it as a first state to go ahead and put a moratorium on building above a certain size.
I think it was 6 months ago, we got to the point where AI was consuming more than crypto mining, or maybe it was a year ago. right? So yeah, like there's so many crazy things going on. Like but if we know anything, it's that tech moguls will find a way to keep building.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes because it's becoming more and more capable. Now, let's change a little bit to a guy you mentioned, Daniel Miessler. He's talking about a personal AI infrastructure and building a personal AI system, which to me seems like kind of the quick win for a lot of CISOs who are drowning in lots of detail and trying to get a million things done, but you can't get to the million things. And it's the old, you can't remember that you're there to drain the swamp when you're spending the whole day swatting alligators. What do you think about his work?
Oh, so I think he's one of the smartest guys out there right now, talking about how, as a practitioner, as somebody who's even marginally technical, that's trying to figure out how do I refactor my my light. So, okay, let me take a step back. The reason I started getting into Daniel Miessler was I've had a series of conversations, and I feel like I'm hyper aware of the fact that we're on the precipice of like huge change in humanity, like bigger than any industrial revolution we've experienced. And I'm not just trying to like create FOMO or create what's the thing that sales guys shouldn't do. Well, anyways, I'm not just trying to scare everybody. I think it's like we're really on a pretty crazy path in like the path of humanity, and I think that so many things are going to change that like most minds don't even have the capacity yet to even grapple with like what that means. I don't know if that's 18 months or 18 years when it happens, but it's coming. And so I think a few things. One is that the traditional definition of work is going to change in some capacity. Number two is that that doesn't need to mean like I think that then that gives humans the ability to figure out where their passions are and to deliver like that passion as a service isn't the right way to say it, but like to be able to like that's their actual value. Like your value isn't your ability to file paper in a filing cabinet anymore. Your value is what's the unique thing that you bring to the world that other people need. And so what Daniel Miessler, he kind of has a few core things, but so he has this one thing, and pardon me, I'm just like I want to make sure I describe this right. So he has this there's a thing called telos, it's TELOS, and it is basically he's created this thing or this framework for showing his problems, his missions, his goals, his strategies, and some other things to help him figure out and document like what's important to him, what his values are, what he's, where he's stuck, what are his like, what are the things that he's figured out in life that like, I believe this because I went through this experience. And so it's just documenting all that. Now there's a method of the madness, and the purpose is so that an AI agent can understand him. So he goes through and documents all these things, and then he's built this other system called PAL or PAI, which is a personal AI infrastructure, which is essentially it's integrated with Claude, and it has a whole bunch of functionalities like hold on, I'm just pulling up the site.
Yeah, I'm looking at his blog right now. He talks about the TELOS exercise, define your purpose, your goals, your challenges in life that you're building toward. Because a lot of times we get so bogged down in the details. If someone says, what do your life consist of? And it's writing, filing, meetings, etc., like that. But that's not your general purpose. If you could free yourself up from the nits and bits and said, what are you really all about? Each of us has hopefully some self-actualization goal. Like we'll go ahead and take a look at the old hierarchy of needs from Maslow. And sometimes we get so bogged down at layers 1 or 2 or 3 that we forget about that there's a 5 up there and maybe even beyond.
Yeah, exactly. And so like this is what is captivating me about this. And so, there's like an architecture that PAI has that includes intelligence, context, personality tools, and a few others. And then what's really interesting about it is like in the context, like if you're using Cloud with PAI, it remembers everything. So like, usually when you use LLMs, it forgets everything once you start a new session. But this starts to remember and keep organized and have like working memory and learning. And it also learns, like, if it made a mistake, it will learn and change its behavior. And then you can start, it teaches you how to build skills with your domain expertise. So like, you know, like we know each other pretty well. So like I'm pretty good at data pipelines, right? Turns out I have a data pipeline SOW skill, right? To build a SOW around data pipeline work, right? That's just an example, right? I could have, turns out I'm pretty good at end of life planning. As you know, my parents have been getting older. I should probably build a skill for that. It's like I've done some pretty cool stuff with AI around that and like giving me ideas. But I really encourage, if you're a CISO or a security practitioner or just somebody who's technical, who's looking to kind of make sense of all this, PAI is very fascinating. But also a lot of Daniel's blogs and writings are just very fascinating about how he's thinking about building multi-agentic systems and like the direction things are going. I think I know we're running low on time and you're probably about to give me a reminder, but one of the things that is really that came out of RSA for me was, and actually based on one of Daniel's blog posts, is that in the future, security products are likely to be more AI driven than UI driven. And so we've been seeing a lot of talk about this with what's the word? Like AI driven SOC stuff. Right. And so like people are starting to talk about that there, but like let's broaden this out the security market. And I'll leave you with this thought which is I think a lot of us are starting to believe that in the future, like the UI will be like the AI doesn't care about UI. An agent doesn't give a crap about UI. And what they're going to evaluate is speed, quality, availability, consistency, you know, determinism, and they're going to care about that. And so as I think of like, if I throw my founder hat on for a second, which, you know, we both wore in the past, I think that in the short term, yeah, UI still matters, and it'll always matter to a certain extent. But I think in the future, agents are going to start evaluating products faster and quicker than humans, and that's going to be the interface of the future. And this is just like, I don't know if this is going to happen or not. Somebody has this like, you know, earworm in my ear where they're like, this one guy who will remain nameless is trying to convince me, and I'm not convinced yet, to change my whole business to be Bitcoin operated, crypto operated, because he believes that faster than we think, as agents produce more and more and control more and more work, that they're going to want to transact in crypto and not fiat currency. And so it's just an interesting thing to think about, like, for, you know, from an economic exercise, like what's going to happen as agents start transacting. Like if I need to go to use this API I've never used, can I just pay them, you know, 1/100th of a Bitcoin and get a response back? Right. It's something to think about.
It is interesting. I'm going to resist going down that rat hole because I was a very early adopter into crypto, and then I was a very early exit out of crypto when it seems to me back in the Silk Road days that the only viable purpose for cryptocurrency at the time seemed to be organized crime and money laundering. And of course, you fast forward to today, and there's a lot of politicians that are into crypto and things like that. And we go, yeah, money laundering and organized crime, but I'm not going to make anything political on this show. I never do. But the interesting thing is that at some point in time, you're right. Getting a different payment system that is digital is going to be necessary for this new economy, whether it's going to be Bitcoin proper, whether it's going to be a stable coin or something yet to be invented. We'll find out. But it is writing on the wall and it's there. So let's kind of recover or recapture some of the ideas that we talked about. We looked at AI in the beginning and things like that, and Copilot being threat protection, data security, mobile device management, doing those three things together. The rollout of AI is part tech, but it's also going to be also with regard to your people, the change management, changing the culture, making training available, helping people understand what the capabilities are rather than just dumping it on their desktop and hoping they'll figure stuff out.
And people want to. One thing in change management, most people want to change and succeed, but the failures on the people trying to teach them because they're unable to like get in the product management mindset, and
Right.
think of it in their way. And so I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, good point. We talked about agentic and kind of use cases. Basically, a use case should have business value. And I think it's really key if we, as CISOs, try to go ahead and if we want to run to the head of the AI parade and have some way of directing that within the rollout of our organization instead of it just simply belonging to IT, or worse yet, belonging to anybody who wants to go ahead and do shadow AI, like the marketing department, then we have to go ahead and demonstrate some business value. And we do that business value through use cases that tie back into where the direction of the organization is going. And then we talked a little bit about Miessler's work. And as you had mentioned, we're going through a tectonic shift in humanity. We were an agrarian society for centuries, if not millennia, but then there was the Industrial Revolution. So we went to jobs and factories. And then from there, we became information workers, at which point we sat down there at our keyboard. And now we're going into the AI world. And it's just as significant of a change as going from one to the next to the next. It may not have been where we thought we were going 20 years ago, unless you're Kurzweil and you're trying to think about what the singularity is going to be. But we're getting there. We might get there sooner than we think. And it does require people to understand what it is that you want to do in your life and what's your purpose. Because if AI is going to fundamentally change the equation of how we interact with our external world as well as with other people and the technology, we need to be very, very clear about what it is we want to be doing. And we don't know yet what type of future humanity is going to achieve. Are we going to get to Star Wars or Star Trek, where you have very, very different outcomes far, far away, either a long time ago or 4 centuries in the future?
Let's hope it's Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly. Where you have a cooperative society where you don't need money to go ahead and buy stuff because pretty much the abundance says whatever you want is there. So why do you show up for work in the morning? And it's not because you have to go ahead and pay your bills. It's because you're doing something you're passionate about. It's meaningful for you and it's meaningful to the people that are around you. And all those things make really good sense. So we'll see how that works out. I hope I live long enough to find out and I don't end up in that end of life plan that you had been working about. Although for those of us who do have aging parents, I might want to trade notes with you on that because get some good insights and hopefully that will be useful. So I'll put show notes in here for the stuff that we've talked about and also include things for Daniel Miessler. And also if somebody wants to follow up with you, how do we get in touch with you?
My company's website's bluecycle.net. So just 2 words, bluecycle.net. And you can put my LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Mm-hmm. That'd be another way to get a hold of me. And then I think I want to do a shameless plug for one of our buddies. I think you're going to SaltCon in a few months.
I am. I'm speaking SaltCon in May.
Yeah. So I'm going to. We're actually going to be a sponsor. So I would encourage people to check that out, and you should put that link in the show notes.
Yeah, for those who SaltCon, NACL.
Pyro did not pay me to say that.
All right. But I mentioned it a couple of times like that. So I'm looking forward to seeing Pyro out there, and that would be great. So SaltCon, NACLCON.com. You're going to find a lot of the old graybeards kind of reminiscing about what things were like in the early days, as well as some useful things that I think will be great for a brand new cybersecurity event that is being brought to you, but not being brought to you at the scale of an RSAC. So I want to thank everybody out there for either watching or listening to CISO Tradecraft. We hope we've been part of your career journey and continue to do so to help other people find us. Go ahead and give us a thumbs up or 5-star or whatever it takes so that we can go ahead and boost our ranking so other people will be able to go ahead and locate this source of career knowledge and wisdom. If you have questions, go ahead and let us know. If you have ideas for further shows, let us know. And if you'd like to follow up with our guest, JP, I'll go ahead and include that in the show notes. So thank you very much for being part of everything. JP, nice to see you again as always. And for everybody out there, go Sabres. Yeah, let's see how we do. And until next time, everybody, stay safe out there.